There we go. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this March session of Reading L.M. Montgomery. And our theme this month is Lions and Lambs rather than St. Patrick's Day. Lions and Lambs, obviously, because it's March. Don't know whether it came in like a lamb, but it appears to be going out like a lion here in Ontario. I am delighted to have readers with us today. Jane Sandell, a favorite with all of us, and Lori Kohut Bianco, who has been a stalwart reader since we first started the readathon. We also have my sister, Allison Dean, and I'll be kicking in with Allison, so we're doing a sister act today. Our first reading is from The Blue Castle. And at this point, I will ask Jane and Lori to introduce themselves before the reading begins. Jane, please go ahead.
Hello, everybody. Nice to be here again to see people from mostly from Canada, I think, but from all over the place. I'm here in Edinburgh where we're having a lamb-like ending to March. It's absolutely glorious, I have to tell you. No snow here at all this winter. It's just been wonderful. Anyway, yeah, like Andrea says, I've read before, so you've probably heard enough of my voice. So anyway, I'm here and happy to be so.
Thank you, Jane. Lori, please go ahead.
Hi, I'm Lori Cahoot Bianco, and I'm coming from Woodbridge, Ontario, which is just outside of Toronto. And yeah, I'm delighted to be here. I've joined the readathon very early on and have read from some of the different books. And the one I'm reading from today is probably my favorite, L.M. Montgomery. It's very hard to pick a favorite. Marilla of Ingleside is also right up there, but this one I really like. So I'm glad to be here today.
Thank you so much, Lori. And before Jane begins with the reading, I would like to dedicate this session to our friends Mary-Eve Goyette-Smith and her spouse Cliff Smith, who are with us today, but off camera. So, Jane, if you would like to
Take it
start
away.
our reading from the Blue Castle about the sacrificial lamb turned lion.
This is such a fun chapter. Anyway, so I'm reading from my wonderful first edition of The Blue Castle, and I'm reading from chapter 11 from the beginning, and then Laurie will take over halfway through. Meanwhile, the dinner in its earlier stages was dragging its slow length along true to sterling form. The room was chilly in spite of the calendar, and Aunt Alberta had the gas logs lighted. Everybody in the clan envied her those gas logs, except Valency. Glorious open fires blazed in every room of her blue castle when autumnal nights were cool. But she would have frozen to death in it before she would have committed the sacrilege of a gas log. Uncle Herbert made his hardy perennial joke when he helped Aunt Wellington to the cold meat. Mary, will you have a little lamb? Aunt Mildred told the same old story of once finding a lost ring in a turkey's crop. Uncle Benjamin told his favourite prosy tale of how he had once chased and punished a now famous man for stealing apples. Second cousin Jane described all her sufferings with an ulcerating tooth. Aunt Wellington admired the pattern of Aunt Alberta's silver teaspoons and lamented the fact that one of her own had been lost. It spoiled the set. I could never get it matched, and it was my wedding present from dear old Aunt Matilda. Aunt Isabel thought the seasons were changing and couldn't imagine what had become of our good old-fashioned springs. Cousin Georgiana, as usual, discussed the last funeral and wondered audibly which of us will be next to pass away. Cousin Georgiana could never say anything as blunt as die. Valency thought she could tell her, but didn't. Cousin Gladys, likewise as usual, had a grievance. Her visiting nephews had nipped all the buds off her houseplants and chivied her brood of fancy chickens. Squeezed some of them actually to death, my dear. Boys will be boys, reminded Uncle Herbert tolerantly. But they needn't be ramping rampageous animals, retorted Cousin Gladys, looking round the table for appreciation of her wit. Everybody smiled, except Valency. Cousin Gladys remembered that. A few minutes later, when Ellen Hamilton was being discussed, Cousin Gladys spoke of her as one of those shy plain girls who can't get husbands, and glanced significantly at Valency. Uncle James thought the conversation was sagging to a rather low plane of personal gossip. He tried to elevate it by starting an abstract discussion on the greatest happiness. Everybody was asked to state his or her idea of the greatest happiness. Aunt Mildred thought the greatest happiness, for a woman, was to be a loving and beloved wife and mother. Aunt Wellington thought it would be to travel to Europe. Olive thought it would be to be a great singer like Tetrazzini. Cousin Gladys remarked mournfully that her greatest happiness would be to free, absolutely free from neuritis. Cousin Georgiana's greatest happiness would be to have her dear dead brother Richard back. Aunt Alberta remarked vaguely that that the greatest happiness was to be found in the poetry of life, and hastily gave some directions to her maid to prevent anyone asking her what she meant. Mrs. Frederick said the greatest happiness was to spend your life in loving service for others, and Cousin Stickles and Aunt Isabel agreed with her. Aunt Isabel with a resentful air, as if she thought Mrs. Frederick had taken the wind out of her sails by saying it first. We are all too prone, continued Mrs. Frederick, determined not to lose so good an opportunity, to live in selfishness, worldliness, and sin. The other women all felt rebuked for their low ideals, and Uncle James had a conviction that the conversation had been uplifted with a vengeance. The greatest happiness, said Valency suddenly and distinctly, is to sneeze whenever you want to. Everybody stared. Nobody felt it safe to say anything. Was Valency trying to be funny? It was incredible. Mrs. Frederick, who had been breathing easier since the dinner had progressed so far without any outbreak on the part of Valency, began to tremble again. But she deemed it the part of prudence to say nothing. Uncle Benjamin was not so prudent. He rashly rushed in where Mrs. Frederick feared to tread. Doss, he chuckled. What is the difference between a young girl and an old maid? One is happy and careless, and the other is happy and hairless, said Valency. You have asked that riddle at least 50 times in my recollection, Uncle Ben. Why don't you hunt up some new riddles, if riddle you must? It is such a fatal mistake to try to be funny if you don't succeed. Uncle Benjamin stared foolishly. Never in his life had he, Benjamin Stirling of Stirling and Frost, been spoken to so, and by Valency of all people. He looked feebly around the table to see what the others thought of it. Everybody was looking rather blank. Poor Mrs. Frederick had her eyes shut, and her lips moved tremblingly, as if she were praying. Perhaps she was. The situation was so unprecedented that nobody knew how to meet it. Valency went on calmly eating her salad, as if nothing out of the usual had occurred. Aunt Alberta, to save her dinner, plunged into an account of how a dog had bitten her recently. Uncle James, to back her up, asked where the dog had bitten her. Just a little below the Catholic Church, said Aunt Alberta. At that point, Valency laughed. Nobody else laughed. What was there to laugh at? Is that a vital part? Asked Valency. What do you mean? Said bewildered Aunt Alberta. And Mrs. Frederick was almost driven to believe that she had served God all her years for naught. Aunt Isabel concluded that it was up to her to suppress Valency. Doss, you are horribly thin, she said. You are all corners. Do you ever try to fatten up a little? No. Valency was not asking quarter or giving it. But I can tell you where you'll find a beauty parlour in Port Lawrence where they can reduce the number of your chins. Valency! The protest was wrung from Mrs. Frederick. She meant her tone to be stately and majestic as usual, but it sounded more like an imploring whine, and she did not say Doss. She's feverish, said Cousin Stickles to Uncle Benjamin in an agonised whisper. We've thought she seemed feverish for several days. She's gone dippy, in my opinion, growled Uncle Benjamin. If not, she ought to be spanked. Yes, spanked. You can't spank her. Cousin Stickles was much agitated. She's 29 years old. So there is advantage at least in being 29, said Valency, whose ears had caught this aside. Doss, said Uncle Benjamin, when I am dead you may say what you please. As long as I am alive, I demand to be treated with respect. Oh, but you know we're all dead, said Valency, the whole Stirling clan. Some of us are buried, and some aren't, yet. That is the only difference. Doss, said Uncle Benjamin, thinking it might cow Valency. Do you remember the time you stole the raspberry jam? Valency flushed scarlet, with suppressed laughter, not shame. She had been sure Uncle Benjamin would drag that jam in somehow. Of course I do, she said. It was good jam. I've always been sorry I hadn't time to eat more of it before you found me. Oh, look at Aunt Isabel's profile on the wall. Did you ever see anything so funny? Everybody looked, including Aunt Isabel herself, which of course destroyed it. But Uncle Herbert said kindly, I wouldn't eat any more if I were you, Doss. It isn't that I grudge it, but don't you think it would be better for yourself? Your stomach seems a little out of order. Don't worry about my stomach, old dear, said Valency. It is all right. I'm going to keep right on eating. It's so seldom I get the chance of a satisfying meal. It was the first time anyone had been called old dear in Deerwood. The Stirlings thought Valency had invented the phrase, and they were afraid of her from that moment. There was something so uncanny about such an expression. But in poor Mrs. Frederick's opinion, the reference to a satisfying meal was the worst thing Valency had said yet. Valency had always been a disappointment to her. Now she was a disgrace. She thought she would have to get up and go away from the table, yet she dared not leave Valency there. Aunt Alberta's maid came in to remove the salad plates and bring in the dessert. It was a welcome diversion. Everybody brightened up with a determination to ignore Valency and talk as if she wasn't there. Uncle Wellington mentioned Barney Snaith. Eventually, somebody did mention Barney Snaith at every Stirling function, Valency reflected. Whatever he was an individual that could not be ignored. She resigned herself to listen. There was a subtle fascination in the subject for her, though she had not yet faced this fact. She could feel her pulses beating in her fingertips. Of course they abused him. Nobody ever had a good word to say of Barney Snaith. All the old wild tales were canvassed. The defaulting cashier, counterfeit, infidel murderer in hiding legends were thrashed out. Uncle Wellington was very indignant that such a creature should be allowed to exist at all in the neighbourhood of Deerwood. He didn't know what the police at Port Lawrence were thinking of. Everybody would be murdered in their beds at night. It was a shame he should be allowed to be at large after all he had done. What has he done? Asked Valency suddenly. Uncle Wellington stared at her, forgetting that she was to be ignored. Done? Done? He's done everything. What has he done? Repeated Valency inexorably. What do you know that he has done? You're always running him down. And what has ever been proved against him? I don't argue with women, said Uncle Wellington. And I don't need proof. When a man hides himself up there on an island in Muskoka, year in and year out, and nobody can find out where he came from or how he lives or what he does there, that's proof enough. Find a mystery and you find a crime. The very idea of a man named Snaith, said second cousin Sarah. Why, the name itself is enough to condemn him. I wouldn't like to meet him in a dark lane, shivered cousin Georgiana. What do you suppose he would do to you? Asked Valency. Murder me, said cousin Georgiana solemnly. Just for the fun of it, suggested Valency. Exactly, said cousin Georgiana unsuspiciously. When there is so much smoke, there must be some fire. I was afraid he was a criminal when he came here first. I felt he had something to hide. I am not often mistaken in my intuitions. Criminal? Of course he's a criminal, said Uncle Wellington. Nobody doubts it, glaring at Valency. Why, they say he served a term in the penitentiary for embezzlement. I don't doubt it. And they say he's in with that gang that are perpetrating all those bank robberies round the country. Who say? Asked Valency. Uncle Wellington knotted his ugly forehead at her. What had got into this confounded girl anyway? He ignored the question. He has the identical look of a jailbird, snapped Uncle Benjamin. I noticed it the first time I saw him. A fellow by the hand of nature marked, quoted and signed to do a deed of shame, declaimed Uncle James. He looked enormously pleased over managing to work that quotation in at last. He had been waiting all his life for that chance. One of his eyebrows is an arch, and the other is a triangle, said Valency. Is that why you think him so villainous? Uncle James lifted his eyebrows. Generally, when Uncle James lifted his eyebrows, the world came to an end. This time, it continued to function.
How do you know his eyebrows so well, Doss? Asked Olive, a trifle maliciously. Such a remark would have covered Valency with confusion 2 weeks ago, and Olive knew it. Yes, how? Demanded Aunt Wellington. I've seen him twice, and I looked at him closely, said Valency composedly. I thought his face the most interesting one I ever saw. There's no doubt there is something fishy in the creature's past life, said Olive, who was beginning to think she was decidedly out of the conversation, which had centered so amazingly around Valency. But he can hardly be guilty of everything he's accused of, you know. Valency felt annoyed with Olive. Why should she speak up in even this qualified defense of Barney Snaith? What had she to do with him? For that matter, what had Valency? But Valency did not ask herself this question. They say he keeps dozens of cats in that hut up back on Mistowis, said second cousin Sarah Taylor, by way of appearing not entirely ignorant of him. Cats. It sounded quite alluring to Valency, in the plural. She pictured an island in Muskoka haunted by pussies. That alone shows there's something wrong with him, decreed Aunt Isabel. People who don't like cats, said Valency, attacking her dessert with a relish, always seem to think there is some peculiar virtue in not liking them. The man hasn't a friend except Roaring Abel, said Uncle Wellington, and if Roaring Abel had kept away from him, as everyone else did, it would have been better for some members of his family. Uncle Wellington's rather lame conclusion was due to a marital glance from Aunt Wellington, reminding him of what he had almost forgotten, that there were girls at the table. If you mean, said Valency passionately, that Barney Snaith is the father of Cecily Gay's child, he isn't. It's a wicked lie. In spite of her indignation, Valency was hugely amused at the expression of the faces around that festal table. She had not seen anything like it since the day 17 years ago, when at Cousin Gladys's thimble party, they discovered that she had got something in her head at school. Ice in her head. Valency was done with euphemisms. Poor Mrs. Frederick was almost in a state of collapse. She had believed, or pretended to believe, that Valency still supposed the children were found in parsley beds. Hush, hush, implored Cousin Stickles. I don't mean to hush, said Valency perversely. I've hush-hushed all my life. I'll scream if I want to. Don't make me want to. And stop talking nonsense about Barney Snaith. Valency didn't exactly understand her own indignation. What did Barney Snaith's imputed crimes and misdemeanors matter to her? And why, out of all of them, did it seem most intolerable that he should have been poor, pitiful little Cecily Gay's false lover? For it did seem intolerable to her. She did not mind when they called him a thief and a counterfeiter and a jailbird, but she could not endure to think that he had loved and ruined Cecily Gay. She recalled his face on the 2 occasions of their chance meetings, his twisted, enigmatic, engaging smile, his twinkle, his thin, sensitive, almost ascetic lips, his general air of frank daredeviltry. A man with such a smile and lips might have murdered or stolen, but he could not have betrayed. She suddenly hated everyone who said it or believed it of him. When I was a young girl, I never thought or spoke about such matters, Doss, said Aunt Wellington crushingly. But I'm not a young girl, retorted Valency, uncrushed. Aren't you always rubbing that into me? And you are all evil-minded, senseless gossips. Can't you leave poor Sissy Gay alone? She's dying. Whatever she did, God or the devil has punished her enough for it. You needn't take a hand, too. As for Barney Snaith, the only crime he has been guilty of is living to himself and minding his own business. He can, it seems, get along without you, which is an unpardonable sin, of course, in your little snobocracy. Valancy coined that concluding word suddenly and felt that it was an inspiration. That was exactly what they were, and not one of them was fit to mend another. Valancy, your poor father would turn over in his grave if he could hear you, said Mrs. Frederick. I dare say he would like that for a change, said Valancy brazenly. Doss, said Uncle James heavily. The 10 Commandments are fairly up to date still, especially the 5th. Have you forgotten that? No, said Valancy, but I thought you had, especially the 9th. Have you ever thought, Uncle James, how dull life would be without the 10 Commandments? It is only when things are forbidden that they become fascinating. But her excitement had been too much for her. She knew by certain unmistakable warnings that one of her attacks of pain was coming on. It must not find her there. She rose from her chair. I'm going home now. I only came for the dinner. It was very good, Aunt Alberta, although your salad dressing is not salt enough, and a dash of cayenne would improve it. None of the flabbergasted silver wedding guests could think of anything to say until the lawn gate clanged behind Valancy in the dusk. Then, she is feverish. I've said right along she was feverish, moaned Cousin Stickles. Uncle Benjamin punished his pudgy left hand fiercely with his pudgy right. She's dippy. I tell you, she's gone dippy, he snorted angrily. That's all there is about it. Clean dippy. Oh, Benjamin, said Cousin Georgina soothingly, don't condemn her too rashly. We must remember what dear old Shakespeare says, that charity thinketh no evil. Charity? Poppycock, snorted Uncle Benjamin. I never heard a young woman talk such stuff in my life as she just did. Talking about things she ought to be ashamed to think of, much less mention. Blaspheming. Insulting us. What she wants is a generous dose of spank weed, and I'd like to be the one to administer it. Uncle Benjamin gulped down the half of a scalding cup of coffee. Do you suppose that the mumps could work on a person that way? Wailed Cousin Stickles. I opened an umbrella in the house yesterday, sniffed Cousin Georgina. I knew it betokened some misfortune. Have you tried to find out if she has a temperature? Asked Cousin Mildred. She wouldn't let Amelia put the thermometer under her tongue, whimpered Cousin Stickles. Mrs. Frederick was openly in tears. All her defenses were down. I must tell you, she sobbed, that Valancy has been acting very strangely for over 2 weeks now. She hasn't been a bit like herself. Christine could tell you. I have hoped against hope that it was only one of her colds coming on. But it must be something worse. This is bringing on my neuritis again, said Cousin Gladys, putting her hand to her head. Don't cry, Amelia, said Herbert kindly, pulling nervously at his spiky gray hair. He hated family ructions. Very inconsiderate of Doss to start one at his silver wedding. Who could have supposed she had it in her? You'll have to take her to a doctor. This may be only a brainstorm. There are such things as brainstorms nowadays, aren't there? I suggested consulting a doctor to her yesterday, moaned Mrs. Frederick, and she said she wouldn't go to a doctor. Wouldn't. Oh, surely I have had trouble enough. And she won't take Redfern's bitters, said Cousin Stickles. Or anything, said Mrs. Frederick. And she's determined to go to the Presbyterian church, said Cousin Stickles, repressing, however, to her credit, be it said, the story of the banister. That proves she's dippy, growled Uncle Benjamin. I noticed something strange about her the minute she came in today. I noticed it before today. Uncle Benjamin was thinking of Mirazh. Everything she said today showed an unbalanced mind. That question, was it a vital part? Was there any sense at all in that remark? None whatever. There never was anything like that in the Sterlings. It must be from the Wandsboroughs. Poor Mrs. Frederick was too crushed to be indignant. I never heard of anything like that in the Wandsboroughs, she sobbed. Your father was odd enough, said Uncle Benjamin. Poor Pa was peculiar, admitted Mrs. Frederick tearfully, but his mind was never affected. He talked all his life exactly as Valancy did today, retorted Uncle Benjamin. and he believed he was his own great-great-grandfather born over again. I've heard him say it. Don't tell me a man who believed a thing like that was ever in his right senses. Come, come, Amelia, stop sniffling. Of course, Doss has made a terrible exhibition of herself today, but she's not responsible. Old maids are apt to fly off on a tangent like that. If she had been married when she should have been, she wouldn't have got like this. Nobody wanted to marry her, said Mrs. Frederick, who felt that somehow Uncle Benjamin was blaming her. Well, fortunately, there's no outsider here, snapped Uncle Benjamin. We may keep it in the family yet. I'll take her over to see Dr. Marsh tomorrow. I know how to deal with pig-headed people. Won't that be best, James? We must have medical advice, certainly, agreed Uncle James. Well, that's settled. In the meantime, Amelia, act as if nothing has happened and keep an eye on her. Don't let her be alone. Above all, don't let her sleep alone. Renewed whimpers from Mrs. Frederick. I can't help it. Night before last, I suggested she'd better have Christine sleep with her. She positively refused and locked her door. Oh, you don't know how she's changed. She won't work. At least she won't sew. She does her usual housework, of course, but she wouldn't sweep the parlor yesterday morning, though we always sweep it on Thursdays. She said she'd wait until it was dirty. Would you rather sweep a dirty room than a clean one? I asked her. She said, of course, I'd see something for my labor then. Think of it. Uncle Benjamin thought of it. The jar of potpourri, Cousin Stickles pronounced it as spelled, has disappeared from her room. I found the pieces in the next lot. She won't tell us what happened to it. I should never have dreamed it of Doss, said Uncle Herbert. She's always seemed such a quiet, sensible girl. A bit backward, but sensible. The only thing you can be sure of in this world is the multiplication table, said Uncle James, feeling cleverer than ever. Well, let's cheer up, suggested Uncle Benjamin. Why are chorus girls like fine stock raisers? Why, asked Cousin Stickles, since it had to be asked, and Elsie wasn't there to ask it. Like to exhibit calves, chuckled Uncle Benjamin. Cousin Stickles thought Uncle Benjamin a little indelicate, before Olive, too. But then he was a man. Uncle Herbert was thinking that things were rather dull now that Doss had gone.
Wonderful. Thank you, Jane. Thank you, Lori. What a wonderful reading for the beginning of spring on a dull gray day. A touch of humor and lightness. And I do especially like the ending, where all the relatives are in despair. But Valency's particularly fine too. So thank you again, Jane and Lori. I would point out that we know that Leesdale will be running the musical, The Blue Castle, in July.
When in July is that going to be?
I think July 3rd through to, let me just check. April, May, June, July. Friday, July 3rd, and I believe they said it goes through to the 12th, so I'm imagining they would run it on the weekends.
Okay.
Yeah, isn't it lovely seeing Valency turn over a new leaf and tell her relatives where to go in nicer words than we would expect, but in such a witty way. Our next reading for today actually has to do with lions. It is chapter 37 in the Canadian American version of Jane of Lantern Hill, and I believe chapter 36, Allison, in the British version.
Yes.
I thought it was another nice, humorous piece, and it also reminds us of lambs, lions, and the like. So, Allison, if you would care to introduce yourself, please.
No problem. As Andrea has said, I'm her sister. And Isis. And I've been reading since the very beginning of the readathon. And we always seem to enjoy doing it. And as most of you who've watched know, I always have bears. So there are several bears, including one very small religious called Friar Simon. And he's taking part. So, yes, I am reading from chapter 36 of my 1938 Harrop's edition. Hitherto, Jane's career at Lantern Hill had been quite unspectacular. Even when she was seen barefooted nailing shingles on a barn roof, it made only a local sensation, and nobody but Mrs. Solomon Snowbeam said much about it. Mrs. Snowbeam was shocked. There was nothing, she said again, that child would stick at. And then, all at once, Jane was in the headlines. The Charlatan papers gave her the front page for 2 days. And even the Toronto dailies gave her a column with a picture of Jane and the lion. Some lion thrown in. The sensation at 60 Gay must be imagined. Grandmother was very bitter, just like a circus girl, and said it was exactly what might have been expected. Mother thought, but did not say, that no one could really have expected to hear of Jane ambling about Prince Edward Island, leading lions by the mane. There had been rumors about the lion for a couple of days. A small circus had come to Charlatan, and a whisper got about that their lion had escaped. Certainly people who went to the circus saw no lion. There was a good deal of excitement. Once a monkey had escaped from a circus. But what was that to a lion? It did not seem certain that anyone had actually seen the lion, but several were reported to have seen him, here, there, and the other place miles apart. Calves and young pigs were said to have disappeared. There was even a yarn that a short-sighted old lady in the royalty had patted him on the head and said, "Nice doglums." But that was never substantiated. The royalty people indignantly denied that there were any lions at loose ends. Such yarns were bad for tourist traffic. "I've no chance of seeing it," said Mrs. Louisa Lyons mournfully. "That's what comes of being bedrid. You miss everything." Mrs. Louisa had been an invalid for 3 years and was reputed not to have put a foot under her without assistance in all that time. But it was not thought she missed much of what went on in the Corners and Queen's Shore and Harbour Head for all that. "I don't believe there is any lion," said Jane, who had been shopping at the Corners and had dropped in to see Mrs. Lyons. Mrs. Lyons was very fond of Jane and had only one grudge against her. She could never pick anything out of her about her father and mother and Lillian Morrow, and not for any lack of trying. "Closer than a clam, that girl is when she wants to be," complained Mrs. Louisa. "Then how did such a yarn start?" she demanded of Jane. "Most people think the circus people never had a lion, or it died, and they want to cover it up because the people who came to see a lion would be disappointed and mad. But they've offered a reward for it." They've only offered $25. If they had really lost a lion, they'd offer more than that. But it's been seen. I think folks just imagined they saw it, said Jane. And I can't even imagine it, groaned Mrs. Louisa. And it's no use to pretend I imagined it. Everyone knows a lion wouldn't come upstairs to my room. If I could see it, I'd likely have my name in the paper. Martha Tolling has had her name in the paper twice this year. Some people have all the luck. Martha Tolling's sister died in Summerside last week. What did I tell you? Said Mrs. Louisa in an aggrieved tone. Now she'll be wearing mourning. I never have a chance to wear mourning. Nobody has died in our family for years. And black always did become me. Ah, well, Jane, you have to take what you can get in this world, and that's what I've always said. Thank you for dropping in. I've always said to Mattie, there's something about Jane Stewart I like. Say what you will. If her father is queer, it isn't her fault. Mind that turn of the stairs, Jane. I haven't been down it for over a year, but someone is going to break her neck there sometime. It happened the next day, a golden August afternoon, when Jane and Polly and Shingle and Caraway and Punch and Min and Ding Dong and Penny and young John had gone in a body to pick blueberries in the barrens at the harbour head, and were returning by a shortcut across the back pastures of the Corners farms. In a little wood glen full of goldenrod, where Martin Robin's old hay barn stood, they met the lion, face to face. He was standing right before them among the goldenrod, in the shadows of the spruces. For one moment, they all stood frozen in their tracks. Then, with a simultaneous yell of terror, Jane yelled with the best of them. They dropped their pails and bolted through the goldenrod into the barn. The lion ambled after them. More yells. No time to close the old ramshackle door. They flew up a wobbly ladder, which collapsed and fell as young John scrambled to safety beside the others on the crossbeam, too much out of breath to yell again. The lion came to the door and stood there for a minute in the sunshine, slowly switching his tail backward and forward. Jane, recovering her poise, noticed that he was somewhat mangy and lank. But he was imposing enough in the narrow doorway, and nobody could reasonably deny that he was a lion. He's coming in, groaned Ding Dong. Can lions climb? Gasped Shingle. I don't think so, said Polly through her chattering teeth. Cats can, and lions are just big cats, said Punch. Oh, don't talk, whispered Min. It may excite him. Perhaps, if we keep perfectly quiet, he will go away. The lion did not seem to have any intention of going away. He came in, looked about him, and lay down in a patch of sunshine with the air of a lion who had any amount of spare time. He don't seem cross, muttered Ding Dong. Maybe he isn't hungry, said young John. Don't excite him, implored Min. He isn't paying any attention to us, said Jane. We needn't have run. I don't believe he'd have hurt us. You run as fast as us, said Penny Snowbeam. I bet you was as scared as any of us. Of course I was. It was all so sudden. Young John, stop shaking like that. You'll fall off the beam. I'm scared, blubbered young John shamelessly. You laughed at me last night and said I'd be scared to pass a patch of cabbages, said Caraway venomously. Now look at yourself. None of your lip. A lion isn't a cabbage, whimpered young John. Oh, you will excite him, wailed Min in despair. The lion suddenly yawned. Why, thought Jane, he looks exactly like that jolly old lion in the movie news. Jane shut her eyes. Is she praying? Whispered Ding Dong. Jane was thinking. It was absolutely necessary for her to get home soon if she were going to have Dad's favorite scalloped potatoes for his supper. Young John was looking absolutely green. Suppose he was sick? She believed the lion was only a tired, harmless old animal. The circus people had said he was as gentle as a lamb. Jane opened her eyes. I am going to take that lion up to the Corners and shut him up in George Tanner's empty barn, she said. That is, unless you'll all come down with me and slip out and shut him up here. Oh, Jane, you wouldn't. You couldn't. The lion gave a rap or two on the floor with his tail. The protests died away in strangled yelps. I'm going, said Jane. I tell you, he's tame as tame. But you stay here quietly till I get him well away, and don't yell, any of you. With bulging eyes and bated breath, the whole gang watched Jane slide along the beam to the wall, where she climbed nimbly down to the floor. She marched up to the lion and said, Come.
The lion came. 5 minutes later, Jake McLean looked out of the door of his blacksmith shop and saw Jane Stewart go past, leading a lion by the mane, within spitting distance, as he solemnly averred later. When Jane and the lion, who seemed to be getting on very well with each other, had disappeared around the back of the shop, Jake sat down on a block and wiped the perspiration from his brow with a bandana. I know I'm not quite sane by times, but I didn't think I was that far gone. Julius Evans, looking out of his store window, didn't believe what he saw either. It couldn't be. It simply wasn't happening. He was dreaming or drunk or crazy. That was it. Crazy. Hadn't there been a year when his father's cousin was in the asylum? Those things ran in families. You couldn't deny it. Anything was easier to believe than that he had seen Jane Stewart go up the side lane by his store, towing a lion. Mattie Lyons ran up to her mother's room, uttering piteous little gasps and cries. What's the matter? Demanded Mrs. Louisa, screeching like you was demented. Oh, Ma, Jane Stewart's bringing a lion here. Mrs. Louisa got out of bed and got to the window just in time to see the lion's tail disappear with a switch around the back porch. I've got to see what she's up to. Leaving the distracted Mattie wringing her hands by the bed, Mrs. Louisa got herself out of the room and down the staircase with its dangerous turn as nimbly as she had ever done in her best days. Mrs. Parker Crosby, who lived next door and had a weak heart, nearly died of shock when she saw Mrs. Louisa skipping across her backyard. Mrs. Louisa was just in time to see Jane and the lion ambling up Mr. Tanner's pasture on their way to the hay barn. She stood there and watched Jane open the door, urge the lion in, shut it, and bolt it. Then she sat down on the rhubarb patch, and Mattie had to get the neighbors to carry her back to bed. Jane went into the store on her way back and asked Julius Evans, who was still leaning palely over the collection of fly-spotted jugs on his counter, to call Charlottetown and let the circus people know that their lion was safe in Mr. Tanner's barn. She found her dad in the kitchen at Lantern Hill, looking rather strange. "Jane, it's the wreck of a fine man that you see before you," he said hollowly. "Dad, what is the matter?" "Matter," says she, with not a quiver in her voice. "You don't know, I hope you never will know, what it is like to look casually out of a kitchen window where you are discussing the shamefully low price of eggs with Mrs. Davy Gardner and see your daughter, your only daughter, stepping high, wide, and handsome through the landscape with a lion. You think you've gone suddenly mad? You wonder what was in that glass of raspberry shrub Mrs. Gardner gave you to drink. Poor Mrs. Davy, as she remarked pathetically to me, the sight jarred her slats. She may get over it, Jane, but I fear she will never be the same woman again." "He was only a tame old lion," said Jane impatiently. "I don't know why people are making such a fuss over it." "Jane, my adored Jane, for the sake of your poor father's nerves, don't go leading any more lions about the country, tame or otherwise." "But it's not a thing that's likely to happen again, Dad," said Jane reasonably. "No, that is so," said Dad in apparent great relief. "I perceive that it is not likely to become a habit. Only, Janelet, if you someday take a notion to acquire an ichthyosaurus for a family pet, give me a little warning, Jane. I'm not as young as I used to be." Jane couldn't understand the sensation the affair made. She hadn't the least notion she was a heroine. "I was frightened of him at first," she told the Jimmy Johns, "but not after he yawned." "You'll be too proud to speak to us now, I suppose," said Caraway Snowbeam wistfully, when Jane's picture came out in the papers. Jane and the barn and the lion had all been photographed separately. Everybody who had seen them became important, and Mrs. Louisa Lyons was a rapturous woman. Her picture was in the paper too, and also a picture of the rhubarb patch. "Now I can die happy," she told Jane. "If Mrs. Parker Crosby had got her picture in the paper and I hadn't, I couldn't have stood it. I'm sure I don't know what they did put her picture in for. She didn't see you and the lion. She only saw me. Well, there are some folks who are never contented unless they're in the limelight." Jane was to go down in Queenshore history as the girl who thought nothing of roaming round the country with a lion or two for company. "A girl absolutely without fear," said Steppyard, bragging everywhere of his acquaintance with her. "I realized the first time I saw her that she was superior," said Uncle Tombstone. Mrs. Snowbeam reminded everybody that she had always said that Jane Stewart was a child who would stick at nothing. When Ding Dong Bell and Punch Garland would be old men, they would be saying to each other, "Remember the time Jane Stewart and us drove that lion into the Tanner barn? Didn't we have a nerve?" And that concludes the chapter. Thank you so much, Allison. That was a wonderful reading from you.
You're welcome.
So, lions and lambs. Wonderful theme for this time of year. And thank you to all who put comments in the chat, for Jane and Lori and Allison and myself. And we'll be doing this again in April with Allison Hudson, Caroline Jones, and we have 4 readers for the last chapter, which is very spring-like, and we all love it. All right. Thank you, everyone. See you next month, hopefully, some of you before that. And
Bye.
Yoshiko, please do get sleep after this.
Oh, thank you. I
You're
will.
welcome. All right. Bye for now. Bye, Mom.
Bye.